Hello and welcome to America in Focus, powered by the Center Square. I'm Dan McCaleb, executive editor of the Center Square Newswire service. Joining me again today is the Washington, D.C. bureau chief for the Center Square, Casey Harper. Casey, we have some things to talk about, particularly when it comes to government spending. You wrote this week about a concerning U.S. Congressional Budget Office report that says debt is going to be double the U.S. economy within just a matter of years. What's going on here?
Yeah, this is much less cheery than our 4th of July celebration, but the U.S. Congressional Budget Office, which is the federal nonpartisan budget office that will, for example, score a piece of legislation and say how much it will cost. Taxpayers, I find it to be pretty reliable. It's usually trusted by both Republicans and Democrats, just as a budget office, the official one for Congress. So they do their long-term budget outlooks. They look as much as 30 years into the future, and they say, if we continue with our kind of current level of spending and the obligations that we have made in bills, what's our outlook going to look like? And that's important because often, you might pass $1 trillion spending bill today, but the bill actually will spend that money for years. And it doesn't just spend all the money that day, right? It'll spend it over several years. So we have spending obligations years into the future because of previous legislation, not to mention entitlements, like Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, that kind of thing. And so what did the CBO find? Well, here's a big one. The national debt will be nearly twice as large as the U.S. economy in 30 years, Dan. And to think that our debt within, that is like not a long time. And you think about the history of the country in economic terms. So if we don't have some major financial reform in, we'll say maybe the next 4 or 5 presidents, which doesn't really seem that likely, then we are going to be heading off some kind of debt cliff. To give perspective on that, our deficits are also rising. They're on trajectory to meet 10% of our GDP in that time. So expecting that our deficit will hit 10% of GDP in 2053. This is a quote from CBO. Over the past century, that level has been exceeded only during World War II and the coronavirus pandemic. So we're on track. And the other thing I want to say about this is this assumes that we don't initiate some new giant spending bills over the next 30 years, which is also not very likely, right? So the next president comes in and he wants to, say, build a wall that costs $1 trillion, or it's a Democrat who wants to increase, Medicaid by $1 trillion, then that will change this whole timeline and move it up much closer, right? So this is assuming that we don't have new Congresses come in and spend more money that's not paid for.
Casey, I would have assumed the opposite. I would have assumed Congress, in response to this report, called emergency meetings and say, hey, we got to cut spending or this country is going to be ruined financially. That didn't happen?
Yeah, no, it has not happened yet. It's a sad kind of, I guess, a prisoner's dilemma, because when one party is in power, they want to spend money on all of their pet issues. And when the next one is in power, they say, well, the previous party, they spent money on their issues. So we're not, nobody wants to be the one who is fiscally responsible. So if the Republicans are always fiscally responsible, the Democrats will spend on all their pet projects and vice versa. So I don't really know how this is going to happen. We've been having debt problems like this for over a decade now. It's really gotten worse in the last decade, but I don't know. Congress is, there's a few lawmakers who talk about fiscal responsibility, but Dan, I don't know if you noticed. I remember when Republicans ran on fiscal responsibility and cutting spending, but they don't really do that anymore that I see.
Some talk the talk, but Congress certainly does not walk the walk when it comes to that. A big concern, particularly for those who are approaching retirement age, is programs like Social Security and Medicaid that seniors, retired folks rely on really to cover their day-to-day expenses. And if Congress can't get spending under control, that's in jeopardy. There are talks about significant cuts to benefits such as Social Security and Medicaid because of Congress's out-of-control spending. Casey, got 30 seconds to wrap us up.
Yeah, I'll just give you a stat from Maya McGinnis, who leads a budget group. She said that within a decade, trust funds for Medicare, Social Security, and highways will face insolvency. And if that's allowed to happen for Social Security, for instance, that will mean a 26% across the board benefit cut for all seniors, regardless of how much they depend on the program. So I guess I'll leave you with that cheery note.
Yeah, great. Good for me. Casey, thank you for your insight into this, but we are out of time. Listeners can keep up with this story and more at thecentersquare.com. For Casey Harper, I'm Dan McCaleb. Please subscribe. Thank you for listening and enjoy your Independence Day.